They served him moldy bread. Then they landed the plane to throw him off it. He let them. No argument. No raised voice. Just a man sitting perfectly still while every word they said behind that curtain was recorded. Every lie. Every slur. Every decision made by people who had no idea who they were making it about. The door opened in Memphis. They expected security. What walked through that door destroyed 3 careers before anyone said a word. And he never once raised his voice. The bread was moldy. He could see it the moment he lifted the lid. A faint discoloration at the corner. The kind of thing you might miss if you weren't looking. But he was looking. He was always looking. And the woman who had served it to him was already walking away. Like she knew. Like she had been counting on him to say nothing. Damon West set the lid back down, slowly, and for a moment he just sat with it. 35,000 feet above the ground, in a first-class seat on an airline he owned nearly a quarter of, holding a cardboard box that belonged in economy, he thought. About his mother. He pressed the call button. That was where this story really started. Not with the bread. Not with the box. With the decision to press that button instead of putting the lid back down and letting it go, the way he had let so many things go before he's understood what letting things go actually costs. But to understand why that button mattered, you had to go back a few hours. To 4:47 in the morning when Damon West was already awake. The alarm had nothing to do with it. He was standing at the window of his Manhattan apartment with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, looking out at a city that never quite went dark. He did this sometimes, just stood there, not thinking about nothing, not thinking about everything, thinking about the specific thing that had been sitting in the back of his mind since Renee had flagged the report 3 weeks ago, with a note that said simply, "Read this one carefully." He had read it carefully. The numbers in that report were fine. Good even. On-time performance up. Baggage handling improving. Customer satisfaction scores in premium cabins trending positive for the 3rd quarter in a row. On paper, Apex Airlines was doing exactly what an airline was supposed to do. But there was a footnote. Small. Easy to miss if you were skimming, which most people were. Formal complaints from passengers identifying as Black or African American in first and business class cabins. 23 in the past 14 months. Resolution rate, 31%. He had read that footnote 4 times before he put the report down. 23 complaints. 31% resolution. That meant that 16 people had raised their hand, said something is wrong, something happened to me that shouldn't have happened. And the system had looked at what they said and done nothing. Or close enough to nothing that the difference didn't matter. 16 people. He set the cold coffee down on the windowsill, went to the closet. He always dressed for travel. Quietly. No fuss. Dark gray suit, well cut but not flashy. White shirt, no tie. Shoes polished but not new. He looked like a man who had somewhere important to be. Not like a man who was performing importance. There was a difference. He knew the difference. He had learned it the hard way. His carry-on was all already packed. This day had sent the itinerary the night before. Flight 44112, Apex Airlines, gate state B7, departure 7:15, New York to Los Angeles. He had done this route 40, maybe 50 times, and every time he told himself the same thing. Just watch. Just listen. Don't announce yourself. Let the experience be what it actually is, not what will perform for you when they know who you are. That was the whole point. 3 years ago, Damon had invested quietly in Apex Airlines, not a small investment, 24% of the company, enough to matter, enough to have a seat in the boardroom. But he had asked for one thing in return for that silence. No one on the operational side would know his name, not the gate agents, not the cabin crew, not the captains, just the executives, just the people in rooms with closed doors, because Damon had learned something in 30 years of building companies. Numbers could hide things. Reports could hide things. Customer satisfaction surveys were just people telling you what they thought you wanted to hear. But a Tuesday morning flight from New York to Los Angeles, that told the truth. He picked up his bag, checked his watch, 5:20 a.m. Time to go find out what kind of company he actually owned. The car arrived at 5:35, black sedan, his usual driver, quiet and professional. They moved through the early morning streets without talking, which was exactly how Damon liked it. He watched the city slide past the window. He always watched. That was the thing about him that people misunderstood. They saw the stillness and thought he was calm, relaxed, unbothered. They were half right. He was still, but not because nothing was happening inside him. It was because everything was happening inside him, and he had spent a long time learning not to let it all spill out at once. His father had taught him that, not with words. With the way he came home from the steel plant on Dunbar Street after 12-hour shifts and sat down at the kitchen table without complaint. Because nothing hurt. Because he had decided, long ago, which battles were worth the breath and which ones would just cost you more than you could afford to spend. Damon had watched his father make that calculation for 20 years. He had spent the last 30 trying to understand when the calculation was wisdom and when it was just surrender. The car pulled up to JFK at 5:58. Damon thanked the driver by name, pulled out his carry-on, walked through the sliding door into the terminal. He moved through check-ins and without stopping. Renee had handled everything digitally. He went straight to security, quiet this early, and through to the terminal in under 12 minutes. Gate B7 was at the far end of the B concourse. He walked slowly, not because he was tired, because he was watching. He watched the cleaning staff moving through the terminal with their carts. He watched a gate agent at B3 deal with an early morning passenger with a patience that deserved more recognition than it ever got. He watched a young man in a food service uniform behind a counter, eyes half closed, starting what was probably a double shift. He watched all of it, and he thought, this is what most people miss. This is the part that doesn't make it into the quarterly reports. The actual texture of how an organization treats people when no one important is looking. He got to gate B7 at 6:22, found a seat away from the cluster of early arrivals, opened his tablet, pulled up the internal service report again. Read the footnote one more time. 23 complaints, 31%. He put the tablet away, looked out at the tarmac where the planes were already moving in the gray pre-dawn light. He thought about those 16 people. What it felt like to raise your hand and be handed a voucher and a form letter, and a silence that said, in the poshlish language of Non's resolution, "We noted your concern and we are done with it now." He thought about what it cost a person to go through that process. Not just the time, the specific cost of deciding to speak up, working up the nerve for it, finding the words for it, and then getting nothing back but a voucher. Most people didn't raise their hand a second time after that. That was the design of it, whether anyone had designed it consciously or not. He stood up when boarding was called, joined the short first-class line, handed his boarding pass to the int, a young man who scanned it without looking up and walked down the jetway. The aircraft was an Apex wide body, relatively new, well-maintained from the outside. He noted that. He found his seat, 1A, window. Left side, he stowed his carry-on, sat down and settled in, opened his tablet, pulled up the notes file he used for operational observations. A simple document, no formatting, just timestamps and plain language. He waited. Her name tag said Bridget. Damon noticed her before she noticed him. That was usually how it went. She was moving through the first-class cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it for a long time. 16 years, according to the personnel records Renee had pulled, when Damon first started paying attention to Apex's service patterns. Bridget Harlow, 14 commendations in her file. 2 formal complaints, both dismissed without action. She was good at her job. He could see that immediately. The way she moved, the way she spoke to each passenger. Warm, attentive, the kind of flight attendant who made first class feel like what people posed for it to feel like. To the man in scene C, a warm smile, a hot towel offered with both hands, a question about his preferred newspaper. To the couple in 2A and 2B, champagne poured without being asked, because she had looked at the manifest and seen they were celebrating an anniversary. Small detail, big impact. To the woman across the aisle in 1B, a recognition, a comment about she always chose the window seat, a familiarity that said, "I remember you," and made the passenger visibly relaxed. Bridget Harlow was good. She moved toward 1A, and something shifted. It was subtle. Almost nothing. The kind of thing you would have to be watching very closely to catch. The smile stayed, but it changed quality, became a different kind of smile. Thinner, more performed. The warmth pulled back half a degree, the way a light dims when something passes between it and you. She stopped at his row. Towel? One word, no eye contact. The hot towel offered in one hand this time, not two. She was already half turned toward the galley. "Thank you," Damon said. She was gone. He held the towel. It was hot. That part was fine. He pressed it to his hands for a moment and then folded it neatly on the edge of his tray table. He noticed. He always noticed. But he didn't say anything. He was gathering information. The aircraft door was still open. Four passengers boarded. An older man in a blazer who got the full treatment from Bridget before he had even properly sat down, champagne in hand before his carry-on was stowed. Two women in business attire who were greeted by name. Damon opened his tablet, typed in the notes file, 702A, hot towel offered with one hand, no eye contact, no champagne offered. Champagne offered to subsequent passengers without prompting. He typed it without emotion. This was data. That was what this was. But underneath the data, something was sitting quiet hands in his chest. Something he recognized. Something he had been carrying since he was 17 years old, and was told by a man in an expensive suit that he didn't quite fit the profile for an internship that his mother's employer had gone out of her way to recommend him for. He had worn his best clothes that day. Taken 2 buses, arrived eight minutes early, didn't quite fit the profile. He closed that memory, returned to the notes. The cabinor sealed it at 7:10. The aircraft began to push back 5 minutes later. During taxi and takeoff, he said nothing, did nothing, just sat with his tablet, watching the New York skyline tilt and fall away beneath him as the aircraft climbed. The seatbelt sign went off at cruising altitude. Bridget began the breakfast service. She worked methodically from rear to front. White china plates, silver cutlery, real glasses. She explained each dish to each passenger as she served it. A quiet, theatrical performance that was genuinely skilled when you step back from everything else and just watch the craft. The man in Chunsi got scrambled eggs with smoked salmon, served with a small bout. The preparation had changed to being relish. The anniversary couple got steak, both of them, plus a small complimentary pastry that Bridget produced with a slight flourish that made the woman smile. The passenger in 1B received her order exactly as placed, with the berries on the side, which was a detail she hadn't mentioned aloud but had been in her profile. Bridget moved forward to row 1. She placed something on Damon's tray table without speaking. A cardboard box, white, the kind used in economy for passengers who didn't receive full meal service. The kind that sat a stack in a galley cart and got handed out like an apology. He looked at it for a moment without touching it. Then he opened it. Inside was a sandwich, packaged. The bread was soft in the wrong way, the kind of soft that meant it had been sitting too long. He picked up one edge of the top slice and looked at the underside. The corner was damp, a faint discoloration, not visible from the outside. He set the bread back down. He sat with it, not with anger. Anger was too simple for what this moment asked of him. What he sat with was older and more complicated than anger. It was the specific weight of a thing you recognize before you fully understand it. The thing you have to take a breath before responding to, because you have been here before. And you know that how you respond will matter more than you want it to. He thought about his mother's hands. Evelyn West had cleaned hotel rooms for 28 years, 6 days a week. The hands that came home at the end of those days were red and cracked, rough at the knuckles in winter. She used to bring home the small lotion bottles that guests left behind in the rooms she cleaned. Sat at the kitchen table in the evenings applying them while they did homework across from her. He had watched her do it hundreds of times, had never once heard her say she was tired. She was always tired, but she knew who was going to listen if she said so. She had run that calculation so many times it had become automatic. And the answer was, not many, so she kept it inside, kept it tight, made herself small enough to fit in the space they were willing to give her. Damon had watched her do that his whole childhood. He had promised himself, somewhere around the age of 22, that he was going to spend his life building things large enough that he never had to make himself that small. He looked at the cardboard box, and he pressed the call button. Not because he was angry, because he was done. Done with the particular calculation his mother had made for 28 years. Done with the question of whether the person he was about to speak to would listen. He was going to speak anyway, and whatever happened next was going to happen on the record. Bridget appeared in approximately 4 minutes. She came with the professional expression of someone prepared to deal with a minor complaint about seat temperature or air pressure. She looked at the box on his tray table. She looked at Damon. Is there a problem? I pre-ordered breakfast when I booked this ticket, Damon said. He kept his voice level, calm, factual, not aggressive, not deferential, just precise. Steak and eggs, medium rare. I have the confirmation email. He turned his tablet to show her. The confirmation was right there. Order number, description, timestamp from 6 weeks prior. Bridget looked at the tablet, a brief look, not long enough to read it. I'm not seeing that in our system. The confirmation came from your systems. Systems sometimes have errors, sir. I apologize for any confusion. She gestured toward the box. We've done our best to ensure every passenger has something this morning. Every passenger in this cabin received a full breakfast service. We had limited quantities of certain items. I can see the plated meals from here. Bridget's expression did not change. That was the professional part, the trained part. She had a face for this and she wore it well. I'll check with my colleagues and see what I can do. She turned and walked back to the galley. Damon watched her go. He picked up his phone, opened his message thread with Renee. Breakfast not delivered per pre-order. Economy class box left its seat. Confirmation email exists and is visible. Bridget Harlow, lead FA, claims no record in system. Renee's response came back in under a minute because Renee was always under a minute. Log. Camera feed is active on your cabin. Audio is recording clean. Server storing continuously. Should I pull the booking records? Yes, he typed. Pull everything. He set the phone down. Lot looked at the box again. Did not touch it. Across the aisle and one row back, the man in 2A had been watching. Damon hadn't spoken to him, hadn't made eye contact. But he was aware of him the way you become aware of a quiet, still presence that is paying very close attention. The man was 71 years old, silver-haired, plain blue jacket. He had been reading a physical newspaper since before takeoff, holding it with the particular steadiness of someone who reads physical newspapers because they have decided it is the right way to read, not because they don't know about other options. Judge Cormac Bell, former federal judge, 31 years on the bench. Renee had mentioned him in her pre-flight brief, not because he was relevant to anything in particular, just because she noted interesting passengers the way other people noted weather. Bell had not looked up when Damon pressed the call button, but he had set his newspaper down, and he had not picked it back up. Bridget returned in 7 minutes. I spoke with my colleagues, she said. Unfortunately, we don't have any additional hot meals available. Inventory was adjusted before departure.
I placed this order 6 weeks ago.
I understand that, sir. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. Can you show me where the order appears in the system? A pause. Small. Almost nothing. I don't have access to booking records from the cabin. The confirmation email is from Apex's own reservation system. The order number is right here. Sir. Her voice stayed smooth, but something underneath it had tightened in a way that wasn't anger exactly. More like impatience wearing the clothes of professionalism. I've done everything I can from my end. I'm not sure what else you're expecting. There it was. I'm not sure what else you're expecting. Not let me escalate this. Not. Let me get you a real answer. Just I'm not sure what else you're expecting. As if the expectations itself was the problem. As if wanting what you had paid for and confirmed in writing was a kind of imposition on her morning. Damon recognized this move. He had seen it in boardrooms and restaurants and hotel lobbies, and once memorably at a gallery opening where a security guard had followed him through 3 rooms before the gallery owner, visibly mortified, had to explain that Damon was one of the event's major donors. The move was this: shift the frame. Stop talking about the problem. Start talking about the person raising the problem. Make the complaint the issue instead of the thing that caused it. He didn't take the bait. I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge of this cab service, he said. That would be me. Then I'd like this conversation documented, please. I'm noting the time, the nature of my complaint. Something moved behind Bridget's eyes. Fast, gone before it fully formed. Of course, she said, I'll make a note. She walked back the galley. Damon's phone buzzed. Renee, I pulled the booking record. Your order is in the system. Steak and eggs confirmed, placed 6 weeks ago. It was marked canceled at 6:48 this morning. 40 minutes before departure. No cancellation request came from your account. He read it twice. Who canceled it? He typed, working on that. The cancellation was logged from a crew access terminal. Ground side, pre-departure. He set the phone feet down on the tray table, looked at the cardboard box, thought about what that meant, not the insult of it, The logistics. Someone's had accessed his booking record before this plane left the gate. Someone with crew-level access to the Apex pre-departure system had looked at his order specifically and canceled it. 40 minutes before departure was not a clerical error. 40 minutes before departure was a choice. Someone had made a specific, deliberate choice. Save a copy of that log entry, he typed. Times stamped. Chain of custody clear. Already done. Damon, are you okay? He looked out the window, though. The clouds below were white and went on in every direction. I'm fine, he typed. Keep recording. A flight attendant he hadn't fully noticed before was standing at the edge of the galley entrance. Young, early 30s. She had been there for part of the last exchange, and she had the look of someone who was doing something complicated inside herself about what she had just witnessed. Not a bad person, not complicit in the way Bridget was complicit, just not yet certain of her own ground in this situation. Her name tag sped Tessa. She met his eyes for just a moment. Then she looked away and went back through the curtain. Bridget came back out of the galley at the same time. She moved through the cabin with renewed purpose. The professional warmth dialed back up as she checked on other passengers, refilled glasses. They exchanged a light comment with the anniversary couple that made them both laugh. She did not stop at 1A. Damon typed in his notes file. No follow-up from lead F since last exchange. Confirmed via Renee. Pre-order exists in systems. Cancelled 6:48 m from crew access terminal. Other passengers continuing to receive service. Seat 1A receiving none. He put the tablet down. He had been patient for 54 years. Not passive, not silent. But patient in the way you learn patience when the world has told you, in 1,000 small and large ways, that your time and your discomfort are less urgent than everyone else's. Patient in the specific way of a man who grew up watching his father come home from the steel plant and sit down without complaint, and his mother up late soften to her hands at the kitchen table and never say, "I'm tired," and who had absorbed from both of them, without anyone having to say it directly, the particular mathematics of knowing which fights you could afford and which ones would cost you more than you had. He had been patient in school, when teachers expected less and he delivered more, and they always seemed faintly surprised, as if the success was inconvenient for the story they had already written. He had been patient in his first job, when he was the only black man in the room for 7 years, and had learned to take up space without making anyone uncomfortable about it. He had been patient when he built his first company, when investors who later tried to claim credit for his success had initially passed on him with explanations that were always about something other than race and never quite added up. He had been patient. He was still patient now, but this was not the same as acceptance, and Damon West had always been very clear on the difference. He pressed the call button again. Bridget came back, still professional, still smooth. But there was something new in the set of her shoulders, the awareness that this was not going to resolve the way these things usually resolved. "Sir, I'd like to understand something," Damon said. "My breakfast order was placed 6 weeks ago and confirmed by your airline's reservation system. I have the documentation. The order was canceled this morning at 6:48 a.m. from a crew access terminal, without my knowledge or its authorization. And I'm sitting here with a box of economy-class food while every other passenger in this cabin received the breakfast they ordered." He paused. "I'd like that to be addressed by someone with the authority to address it. I am the purser on this flight. I have full. Then please use that authority." A silence. Bridget looked at him, and for just a moment, something away from her face. Not the professional mask exactly, something underneath it that was more honest than she intended to be. It lasted about 2 seconds, then it was gone. "I'll see what I can do," she said. She turned and walked back toward the galley. This time, when she pushed through the curtain, Damon heard something, not words, just tone. Her voice on the other side of the curtain, low and clipped, talking to someone. Underneath the professionalism was something that sounded like irritation, not at the situation. At him, his phone buzzed. "Renee, audio from galley just came through. Time-stamped. You need to hear this." He put in an earbud, kept his face still. Bridget's voice, caught clean by the cabin audio system that had been logging everything since before takeoff. "He's one of those, making everything a problem." Another voice, Tessa, quieter. His order was in the Bridget cutting her off. "I know what was in the system. He doesn't get to talk to me like that." He pulled the earbud out. He sat for a moment with what he had just heard. He had been talked to precisely like nothing. He had been calm and factual and had not raised his voice once. And behind the curtain, that had been translated into, "He doesn't get to talk to me like that." He looked out the window. He thought about the footnote again. 23 complaints, 31%. 16 people who had raised their hand and been handed a voucher and a silence. He understood now, more specifically than he had before, how those 16 complaints had been classified as insufficient. How the person on the other end of those complaints had looked at what was filed and said, "I don't see a problem here," because the problem was in the space between what was said and what was meant, between the professional mask and what lived underneath it, between a hand offering a towel in one hand instead of two, between a cardboard box placed on a tray table without eye contact or explanation. None of that showed up cleanly in a complaint form, but it was there. It had always been there. He opened a new message to Audra Phelps, head of HR for Aviation Airlines, a woman he had met twice in boardroom settings and found to be someone who understood, without needing it explained to her, why the 31% number mattered. "Audra, I'm on flight 412. It needs to be today." Then he forwarded the audio clip. Audra's response came in 90 seconds. "Received. Already moving. Tell me where this goes next." He thought about it. "Let it play out a little longer," he typed. "I want the full picture. But be ready. And Audra, check your schedule. We may need you mobile." He set the phone down, looked at the cardboard box one last time. The bread inside was not getting better. He pushed the box to the edge of the tray table, out of his direct line of sight, not dramatic, just practical. He was done looking at it. He picked up his tablet and went back to the footnote in the service report. 23 complaints. He read it one more time, not because he needed to remind himself why this mattered, because he wanted to hold it clearly in his mind before whatever came next. Wanted to make sure that when the next thing happened, and the thing after that, he stayed anchored to the actual reason he was doing this. It was not about the meal. It was never about the meal. It was about the 16 people who had done exactly what they were supposed to do, who had found the complaint process and used it, who had told the truth about what happened to them, and had gotten 31% back. It was about his mother's hands. It was about his father coming home from the steel plant and sitting and saying, "The machine doesn't think about who gets ground up in it." It was about the boy who took 2 buses to an internship interview in his best clothes and arrived 8 minutes early and was told he didn't quite fit the profile. He had spent 30 years building something out of that, out of the specific fuel of knowing exactly what it felt like to be told that your presence was inconvenient. He was not going to waste it on silence. At 8:57 a.m., Tessa appeared at the edge of the galley curtain. She was not on a surface errand. She had nothing in her hands. She stood there for a moment, look at the floor. Then she walked toward his row with the deliberate movement of someone who has made a decision before they felt ready to make it. She stopped beside his seat. She kept her voice low, just for him. "Your order was in the system this morning. I saw it when I was going through the manifest." She paused, didn't look at him directly. "I just thought you should know." She straightened up, smoothed the front of her jacket, and walked back to the galley. Damon looked at the space where she had been standing. Then he picked up his phone. "Tessa Grady," he typed to Renee, Junior FA. "She just confirmed the order was visible in the system this morning. Make sure she's protected in whatever comes next, whatever that looks like." Renee responded immediately, "Already on my list." He put the phone down, looked out the window at the flat white cloud cover below. He thought about what it cost Tessa to walk over here. Sessions into a job, no permanent status, in a cabin where the senior flight attendant had already demonstrated exactly what she was capable of. Walking over here and saying 4 sentences was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the opposite of a small thing. It was the thing that separated the people who watched from the people who didn't, he thought. "I am going to remember her name." The intercom was quiet. The cabin had settled into its cruising rhythm. The anniversary couple were talking in low voices. The man in Swansea had his laptop open. Judge Bell had picked his newspaper back up, but it was resting rather than being read, held at an angle that suggested he was listening to the room more than the words on the page. Damon opened his notes file, typed 8:57 a.m. Tessa Grady, FA confirmed order visible in system this morning. Voluntary disclosure unprompted. Low personal cost to staying quiet. High personal cost to speaking. she spoke. He sat back. Outside the oval window, the country was somewhere under all that cloud, going about its ordinary Tuesday. People moving through their days not knowing and not needing to know that up here, 6 miles above them, a man with a cardboard box on his tray table was deciding something. Not whether to fight. He had already decided that when he pressed the call button, he was deciding what kind of fight this was going to be. Not loud, not theatrical, not the kind that made good footage but changed nothing. The kind that was quiet and documented and patient. The kind that built a record so complete and so clean that when it was time to show it to people who had the power to do something with it, there was nothing left to dispute. He thought about his father one more time, about sitting across the kitchen table from a man who had spent 20 years making the calculation about which battles were worth the breath. He was going to make a different calculation. He picked up his phone. Type to Audra. One more thing. When you get here, I want to talk about the 4 proposals you filed, all of them, starting with the first one. A pause. Then you read those? He typed back. I should have read them a long time ago. He put the phone away, looked at the galley curtain. Behind it, he knew, a version of this story was being told that made him the problem. It was an old story. He'd heard it before. He knew how it usually ended. Not today. He straightened the tablet on his tray table, opened a new document, and began to write. The thing about altitude is that it creates a false sense of isolation. 35,000 feet. 6 miles of air between you and everything that matters down there. You look out the window and the whole world looks small and manageable and contained, like a problem you could solve if you could just see it from far enough away. But the world doesn't stay down there. It comes with you. It sits in the set of a woman's jaw when she places a cardboard box on your tray table. It lives in the half-second pause before a man in a captain's uniform decides who to believe. It breathes in the recycled air of a cabin where everyone has quietly chosen a side without announcing they've done it. Damon knew this. He had always known this. The cabin had settled into its cruising rhythm. The anniversary couple were speaking in low voices, something plain private and warm between them that had nothing to do with the altitude or the delay or the careful tension building near the front of the aircraft. The man in 1C had his laptop open, the blue light of a spreadsheet reflected in his reading glasses. Judge Cormac Bell held his newspaper at the same angle he had been holding it for the past 20 minutes, resting rather than reading, the posture of a man using a prop to stay invisible while he listened. Damon had not touched the cardboard box since he pushed it to the edge of the tray table. It sat there, patient as evidence he was working, or doing the thing that looked like working from the outside. Tablet open. Notes document running. He had 3 browser tabs open to Apex's internal service portal, the booking system interface, and the HR complaint archive that Renee had quietly pulled access credentials for 2 weeks ago when the foot in the Buddha quarterly report started keeping him up at night. 16 people. 31%. He had the names now. Renee had sent them over at 9/2. A clean document, nothing editorialized, just names and then the 1 or 2 sentences each person had written to describe what happened to them. He had read through it twice on the ground. He was reading it again, now, slowly the way you read something when you want to make sure you are carrying it correctly. A retired schoolteacher from Atlanta who had been told her seat upgrade was a system error and spent 6 hours in business class being charged first-class prices for economy service. A software engineer from Houston who had asked 3 times for a blanket and been told they were out, then watched a flight to Preslindut, Pariskalyan Harsafis Siasit behind him without being asked. A woman who had written simply, I was made to feel like I had done something wrong by sitting down. That last one stopped him every time. I was made to feel like I had done something wrong by sitting down. He knew that feeling. He had known it since he was old enough to walk into rooms and read them. The particular sensation of your presence being registered as a problem before you had done or said a single thing. The certain eyes moved over you and then away, not with hostility exactly, but with the specific dismissiveness of someone who has already lied its tone don't belong in their field of vision. He closed the document, opened the audio file Renee had sent from the galley, put in one earbud, left the other out so he could hear the cabin. Bridget's voice came through. He's one of those, making everything a problem. He listened to it again. Then he closed the file, pulled the earbud out, and sat for a moment with the specific weight of hearing yourself described that way. Hearing the language that people used when they thought they were behind a curtain. He's one of those. 4 words that contained an entire architecture of assumption. That required no further explanation between the people using them, because they both already knew exactly what those 4 words meant and who they applied to and under what circumstances. He thought about his father. Franklin West had worked the floor of a steel plant on Dunbar Street for 22 years. Night shifts mostly because the night differential paid 17 cents more per hour, and 17 cents times 8 hours times 6 days added up to something over the course of a year. Something that went toward school supplies and winter coats and the particular dignities that cost money whether you had it or not. Franklin home from those shifts and sat at the kitchen table without complaint. Not because nothing hurt, not because nothing was wrong, but because he had made a calculation, refined decades, about where his energy was most usefully spent. And he had decided that the specific unfairnesses of a steel plant floor would leave nothing for the things that mattered more. Damon had watched his father make that calculation for his entire childhood. He had spent 30 years trying to understand when that calculation was wisdom and when it was just the machine winning by making you believe that fighting it wasn't worth your energy. He had arrived somewhere around his 45th birthday at an answer. The calculation was wisdom when you were protecting something fragile, when you were still building and couldn't afford the exposure, when the fight would cost you more than the thing you think you were fighting for. It was the machine winning when you had enough. When you had the resources and the documentation and the standing to make the fight matter beyond just yourself. Staying quiet didn't protect you. It just protected the machine. He had enough. He had the documentation. He pressed the call button. He was going to need Bridget to come back out here one more time. Not because he expected anything from her, but because the camera was running and the audio was recording and every interaction was being time-stamped and stored on a server that nobody behind that galley curtain knew existed. He needed her to be on the record one more time. Bridget appeared in 3 minutes. She had the expression of a woman who has decided that professionalism is going to carry her through this regardless of what it takes and is testing the edges of that decision. "Sir, I'd like to escalate this matter," Damon said, "to whoever above you has authority on this aircraft. I'm the purser. I have full authority over. Then I'd like to make a formal complaint, in writing, with a copy sent to my email before we land." Something crossed her face. Too fast to name. "I can certainly note your concerns in the flight log. That's not what if I ask." "Sir, I've explained the situation with your order. I've offered alternatives. I'm not sure what more." "You've explained nothing," Damon said, still calm, still even. "You've told me the order doesn't exist in a system where I have documentation proving it does. You've told me you can't access booking records that your own ground crew accessed 40 minutes before departure. And you've offered me," he gestured toward the cardboard box, "this, in place of a meal I ordered 6 weeks ago and confirmed in writing." He paused. "What I'm asking for is a formal written record of this interaction. That's a reasonable request." Bridget held his gaze for a moment. "I'll prepare a note for the flight log," she said, the words arriving in the tone of someone announcing a ascension they intend to make as small as possible. She turned and walked toward the galley. This time, before the curtain had fully settled behind her, a voice came from 2A. "Excuse me." Cormac Bell had set his newspaper down, folded it, placed it on the empty seat beside him with the deliberate movements of a man who has decided to be present in a situation rather than adjacent to it. Bridget stopped, turned, produced the warm version of her face. "Of course." "Can I help you? Like a cup of coffee?" Bell said. "And while you're getting it, I'd like you to know that I've been watching this exchange for the past hour, and I intend to be available as a witness to whatever process follows this flight." Bridget's warm face didn't exactly fall, but something underneath it recalibrated. "I'm sorry?" 31 years on the federal bench, Belled pleasantly. "I've heard a great many witnesses describe what they saw and heard in difficult situations. I have a fairly refined sense of what's happening in this cabin." He picked the newspaper back up. "Coffee when you have a moment." "Thank you." Bridget went through the curtain. Damon did not look at Bell directly, but he said quietly enough for just the two of them, "No." Bell agreed. I didn't. He opened his newspaper. Damon returned to his tablet. He was typing a note about the exchange, timestamp 9:11, when the galley curtain moved again. This time it wasn't Bridget. It was his sister. Lorraine West came through the curtain from business class like she had every right to be there, which in her personal cosmology she always did. 50 years old, 4 years younger than Damon. She had their mother's eyes and their father's stubbornness and a temperament that had never once in her life seen a situation she thought couldn't be improved by her direct involvement. She was in almost every way the opposite of Damon, which was why they worked, the two of them, had always worked. Since the fire escape on Presbury Street when they were teenagers and the summer heat inside was too much, and they'd sit out there in the dark, not talking about what they weren't talking about. And Lorraine's presence had been enough. Not her words, just her. She saw him, saw the cardboard box, and her face did something complicated and fast that Damon recognized as the specific expression she made when she was deciding at high speed how much of what she was thinking to say and in what order. He caught her eye. One small movement, barely a shake. Just enough, not yet. Nat it the way she always read him, 'cause Lorraine read it the way she all her whole life, across kitchen tables and phone calls, and the kind of silences that only exist between people who know each other well enough to hear what's in them. She sat down in the empty seats beside him, said nothing, just sat there, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The way they had sat on that fire escape 20 years ago when being next to someone was the only language that mattered. Damon went back to his tablet. 44 seconds before Bridget came back at the Galategali. She saw Lorraine, stopped. "Excuse me, can I help you?" Lorraine looked up with the expression of perfect innocence that she had been deploying since childhood and had never once actually convinced anyone of anything. "I'm sitting with my brother. Do you have a first-class ticket?" "Business class, I came to visit. Passengers need to remain in their ticketed cabin during the flight." "I'm just sitting here. It's airline policy, ma'am." Lorraine looked at Damon. He gave her the look that said, "Please." She stood up, smoothed her jacket with the leisurely care of someone who is complying with a request at the exact pace she chooses and not one moment faster. "Of course," she said, happy to follow the policy. She looked at Bridget. "My brother ordered steak and eggs 6 weeks ago, by the way, just in case that ever becomes relevant to anyone's morning." Then she walked back through the curtain to business class, unhurried, like she had somewhere pleasant to be. Bridget watched her go, then looked at Damon. "I'll check on the status of your complaint note," she said. He nodded. "Thank you." She went to the galley. Damon picked up his phone. Renee had sent a new message, terminal ID traced. "The crew access cancellation of your order at 6:48 a.m. was logged from a ground crew boarding terminal at JFK. We're working on which specific credential was used." 20 minutes. He typed back, "Take your time. We have hours." He put the phone down. He looked out the window. Below the clouds somewhere, the country was going about its Tuesday. People in offices and kitchens and cars, moving through their ordinary days without knowing and without needing to know that up here a man with a cardboard box on his trace table was building something. Not a confrontation, a record. The kind of record that doesn't burn hot and fast and then cool into nothing.
That stays.
At 9:17, Captain Earl came out of the cockpit. That happens sometimes on long flights.
Pilots made a pass through the cabin.
Part practical, part theater. The captain is present, is managed, trust the process. Dowd was 59. A large man with the comfortable authority of someone who had been the most important person in his professional environment for 30 years. Silver-haired, square-jawed, moving through the first-class cabin with the ease of a man on familiar ground. He stopped to exchange a few words with the passenger in 1C, who apparently knew him from a previous route, nodded to the anniversary couple. Then he reached row 1. He looked at Damon, then at the cardboard box. Back at Damon. "Everything all right up here?" Delivered in the tone of a man who has already received a version of events and is conducting a courtesy check rather than an actual inquiry. "Not entirely," Damon said. "I'd appreciate a few minutes." Dowd's expression stayed pleasant. "Of course. What seems to be the trouble?" I pre-ordered breakfast. It wasn't delivered. When I raised it, I was told the order wasn't in the system. I have documentation showing it was. I've also confirmed that the order was canceled from a crew access terminal before departure, without my authorization." Dowd glanced toward the galley. One quick glance. That sounds like a mix-up, he said. These things happen with pre-orders sometimes. I'll have Bridget. It isn't a mix-up. The pleasantness in Dowd's expression remained, but it was working harder now. I understand your frustration. I'm not frustrated. Simple. Not a correction delivered with heat. Just a precise statement of fact. I'm describing what happened. My order existed. It was canceled by someone with crew-level system access. I'm sitting here with an economy-class food box, while every other passenger in this cabin received the meal they ordered. That's the situation. A pause. Dowd looked at him for a beat that went slightly longer than uncomfortable. I'll look into it, he said. He walked to the galley. The curtain closed behind him. Damon typed in his notes file, 917M. Captain Earl Dowd did not ask to see documentation, did not ask specific questions about the complaint. Made one visual check toward galley before responding to no specific action. Duration of exchange, 90 seconds. He put the tablet down, picked up his phone. There was already a message from Renee, audio from galley. Dowd is in there now. Clean capture sending. He put in the earbud. Bridget's voice first. He's still at it. Now his sister came up here. Another voice. Someone he hadn't identified yet. A third crew member who had stayed mostly in the rear of the cabin. What does he want? What do they always want? To be a problem. Should we comp something just to get past it? Comp him? He got a sandwich. He should be grateful he got anything at all. A shuffle. Bridget's voice dropping lower. He doesn't belong up here making demands. Dressed, nice, fine, whatever. But you know how it is. The kind that's always looking for something to complain about. Then Dowd coming in from outside, the door swinging. What's the situation? Bridget. Passenger in 1A. Being difficult. Claims his pre-order wasn't honored. Says there's a system error. He's been at since we hit cruising altitude. Dowd. Has he raised his voice? Bridget. Not exactly. But the attitude, Dowd. What attitude specifically? Bridget. He's just not letting it go. Dowd, slower now. Is he doing anything that's an actual problem? Bridget. He's making the cabin uncomfortable. A long pause. Dowd, quieter. Okay, let me go talk to him. Damon pulled the earbud out. He sat for a moment, not letting it go. He had asked twice for the meal he had paid for and confirmed in writing. He had done it calmly and factually, and with documentation. He had not raised his voice. He had not made demands outside the scope of what any first-class passenger would reasonably expect. He was not letting it go. He thought about the 16 names in the document Renee had sent. Thought about the school teacher from Atlanta and the software engineer from Houston and the woman who had written simply, I was made to feel like I had done something wrong by sitting down. He thought about which of them had let it go. He thought about what it had cost them to decide that. Sending you another audio file, timestamp 9:17 to 9:22. Galley conversation. Dowd is in it. I need this secured and in the formal record before anything else moves. He forwarded the file. Audra's response. Received. Logged with chain of custody, Damon. This is enough to act on right now if you say the word. He typed back. Not yet. Let it complete itself. He put, but be ready to move fast when I say. At 9:91, Erdawabod came back out of the galley. He had a different quality now, not unkind still, but something had settled into his posture, the stance of a man who has received a briefing and made a determination. He stopped at 1A. Mr. West, he had the name now. Someone had finally checked the manifest. I want to be straightforward with you. He paused in the way of someone selecting words carefully. Apex Airlines takes all passenger concerns seriously, but I also have my responsibility to the comfort and safety of everyone aboard. I've been made aware that some passengers in this cabin are finding the situation. Another pause. Disruptive. Damon looked at him steadily. What specifically have I done this disruptive? It's not about specific actions, necessarily. Then what is it about? Dowd's jaw tightened. Just slightly. The almost invisible movement of a man not used to having authority questioned in calm, direct, unanswerable terms. Sir, I'm asking you to allow my crew to handle this matter and to let the flight continue without further incident. I would like nothing more, Damon said. I've been sitting quietly in this seat for 2 hours. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't threatened anyone. I haven't refused a single instruction. I asked for the breakfast I pre-ordered and documented. I followed up when it wasn't delivered. I requested a formal record of the complaint. Which of those is the incident you're asking me not to create? The anniversary couple had gone quiet. The man in 1C was looking at his phone with excessive concentration. Dowd held eye contact. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, "to let this go. And if I don't," a pause, longer than the others, "then I may need to make a decision about this flight." Damon looked at him for a moment. "That would be your decision to make, Captain, and you'd be making it on the record." Dowd turned and went back to the cockpit. The cabin held its breath. From 2A, Cormac Bell set his newspaper down for the third time. He did not pick it up again. He looked at the closed cockpit door, then at the galley curtain, then at Damon. "The people who tell you to let something go," he said, conversationally, as if continuing a discussion they had been having, "are almost always the people who benefit most from you letting it go." He sat back. "In my experience," he said. Damon said nothing, but he heard it. The intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're going to be making an unscheduled stop this morning in Memphis, Tennessee. We have a technical matter that requires attention before we continue to Los Angeles. We expect the stop to be brief. I apologize for any inconvenience and want to assure you that your safety is our first priority. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin." The announcement landed in the cabin the way an unexpected sound lands in a quiet room. First, the silence that follows it, and then moving outward from that silence, the reactions. The businessman in 1C. "You have got to be joking." He checked his watch with the energy of a man calculating lost billable hours. The anniversary couple looked at each other with the mutual distress of people whose carefully timed day was coming apart. A woman 3 rows back was already on her phone, speaking in the hushed, urgent tones of someone rerouting, connecting flights in real time. From business class through the curtain, Damon could hear specific qualities of silence that meant Lorraine was sitting very still and doing math. He looked at the tray table, at the card box, at the unchanged, unresolved, unaddressed situation that had been sitting in front of him for 2 hours. Technical matter. He picked up his phone and called Renee. Not a text this time. She answered on the first ring. "Memphis," she said before she spoke. "You already know. I've been watching the flight status. Audra called me 30 seconds after the intercom." "Where is she?" "Already in a car. She was at a client meeting near JFK this morning. She can be at the Memphis gate in 40 minutes from touchdown." He exhaled slowly. "Get her everything. The booking record, the terminal ID, both audio files, the camera feed timestamps, all of it sent to her and to legal before we land. Already done. Sent it the moment the diversion was announced. And Tessa Grady, I know. Make sure she's protected, whatever form that needs to take, whatever it costs." Renee's voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, more direct. "I've worked for a lot of people. You're the only one who would have made that call first." He didn't respond to that. "The board," he said. "Not yet. Not until I've talked to Audra on the ground and seen where this lands." Understood. He ended the call. He looked around the cabin, the businessman still checking his watch, the anniversary couple talking in low, urgent voices, the woman on the phone. Judge sitting perfectly still, notebook open on his tray table now, pen in hand, writing something down with the slow, careful movements of a man who understood that some things needed to exist on paper in someone's handwriting. Damon thought about all of them, about the specific unfairness of what was happening to them right now. These people had nothing to do with the cardboard box on his tray table. They had nothing to do with a 68-second galley conversation about whether he had the right to not let it go. They had booked their seats and paid their fares and arranged their days around a flight that was now putting them down in Memphis at a cost they had not agreed to. That was how it worked. The damage never stayed contained to the person it was aimed at. It spread. It rippled outward and caught everyone standing near enough to be caught. That was the part the people who said just let it go never factored in. Letting it go didn't make it smaller. It just made it invisible, which was not the same thing. Bridget came out of the galley with the practiced composure of someone managing a situation. She moved through the cabin making the rounds. Memphis was brief. Nothing to worry about. Appreciate your patience. She was smooth at this part. Good at the reassurance, good at projecting the calm that made other people feel calm. She did not stop at 1A. The Tessa came out work the room. Tessa came out behind her, carrying a tray of water glasses for passengers who looked stressed. She moved quietly, efficiently, without the performance layer that Bridget brought to everything. She handed a glass to the woman on the phone, who accepted it without looking up. She offered one to the anniversary couple. She paused at 2A and set one on Bell's tray table, and he thanked her by name, which seemed to briefly surprise her. She came to 1AA. She set a glass of water down on Damon's tray table, and she stayed there for a moment. She had nothing else in her hands, no reason to linger. She was lingering anyway, and they both knew it. And she looked like she was making a decision at the exact speed decisions get made when there isn't time to think them through properly. She said quietly, "I need you to know something." He looked at her. "What Bridget said about you, in the galley, all of it." She kept her voice low enough that it didn't carry past the row. "I've been here 7 months. I've watched things happen that I told myself weren't my business. I told myself I needed to get through the probationary period first, that I'd say something once I was in a safer position." She stopped, started again. "There isn't a safer position, there's just now or not." Damon said, "I know. So if someone asks me what I saw today," she said, "I'm going to tell them, all of it. The truth, someone will ask, I know." A pause. "I'm ready." She picked up her empty tray and moved on. Damon watched her go, 7 months into a career. The easiest thing in the world would have been to put the glass down and keep moving. To tell herself she hadn't heard clearly. To file it away in the same drawer where she had been filing things for 7 months. The drawer labeled "Not my business." Not yet, not safe enough. She had not done that. He thought people like Tessa Grady are why things eventually change. Not because they're powerful. Not because they have leverage or documentation or access to the right systems, but because at a certain point they decide that the cost of staying quiet has become higher than the cost of speaking, and they speak. And the record is different because of it. The aircraft began to descent. Memphis spread out below the breaking cloud cover, flat and wide and ordinary in the late morning light. An airport doing its unremarkable Tuesday work, unaware that something was about to happen at Gate B, something that would take months to full process and years to fully understand. Damon closed his notes file. He had everything he needed. The cardboard box sat at the edge of the tray table where he had put it 2 hours ago. He looked at it one more time, thought about what it represented. Not just the disrespect, the calculation behind the disrespect, the specific belief that he would take what he was given and be quiet about it, because that was what was expected and what had always worked before. He left the box exactly where it was. He was going to walk off this aircraft in Memphis, and there was going to be a record so complete and so clear that nothing in it could be disputed. Not the booking cancellation, not the audio, not the camera footage, not the 16 names. The aircraft touched down at 10:24. The usual sounds of arrival, the thud of the jetway connecting, then a pause. The cabin door opened. Bridget moved to the front, stood straight, looked at a point slightly above everyone's heads. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated for just a few more minutes while we complete the arrival process." Nobody said anything, but several people looked at Damon. He looked forward. He was thinking something his father had said. The machine doesn't think about who gets ground up in it. His father had been right. But his father had also never been in a position to introduce enough friction to make the machine stop. Damon was. The door of the aircraft swung fully open, and the person who stepped through it was not airport security, was not a gate agent, was not anyone who belonged to the ordinary choreography of an unscheduled stop. Audra Phelps walked down the aisle of Flight 412 in a charcoal suit, moving with the specific purposefulness of someone who has been preparing for this moment for longer than today. 2 people came behind her, one with a legal pad, one with a tablet. She stopped beside seat 1A. She looked at Damon. "Mr. West," she said, calm, direct. "No performance in either direction. I'm sorry it took this long." "You're right on time," he said. She turned to face the front of the cabin. Bridget had not moved from her position near the door. Audra looked at her. "Mrs. Harlow, I need to speak with you and Captain Dowd. Both of you, please." Bridget's composure held for another few seconds, then something in it cracked, very quietly, at the edges. The way things crack when the structure beneath them has already failed and the surface is only now catching up. "On what basis? We have complete audio and video documentation of the events of this flight," Audra said. Flat, factual. The kind of statement that doesn't need emphasis because the content is sufficient. "We also have the pre-departure booking record showing unauthorized cancellation of a pre-ordered meal traced to a crew access terminal with a specific credential timestamp." She paused. This isn't a service complaint review. This is a formal HR investigation. I need you both off this aircraft in the next 10 minutes. The first-class cabin had gone the kind of quiet that is different from ordinary quiet. The kind where people aren't just not talking. They're barely breathing, because they understand they are watching something that is going to matter. Bridget looked at Damon. He looked back at her, not with triumph, not with satisfaction, with something that was closer to sorrow. The particular sorrow of being right about something you had hoped you were wrong about. Of having the thing you suspected confirmed so completely that there was nothing left to interpret. And behind Bridget, at the edge of the galley curtain, Tessa Grady stood with her hands clasped in front of her, still, ready. Captain Earlder came out of the cockpit. He took in the scene the way trained people take in scenes, quickly and completely. His eyes moved from Audra to the two people behind her to Damon and back to Audra. He stood in the aisle. 30 years of command, of being the final authority on everything that happened inside this aircraft, of having his judgment trusted without question, because that was how it had always worked, and because the people who trusted it didn't have a reason not to. He stood there, and the 30 years sat on him differently than they had 2 hours ago. He looked at Damon. "I didn't know who you were," he said. His whiskas had lost most of its command quality. What was left was something more human and less certain. The cabin was completely still. Damon looked at him. He held it for a moment. The moment that everything had been building toward since 7:02 a.m., when a hot towel was offered in one hand instead of two. "That," Damon said quietly, "is exactly the problem, Caps. He let it sit. You should have treated me right without needing to know who I was." Dowd had nothing to say to that because there was nothing to say to it. It was simply true. True in the way that certain things are true. Not arguable, not complicated, not dependent on context or interpretation or the particular version of events you happen to be carrying. True. Dowd looked at the floor. Then he turned and walked off the aircraft. And as he went, the cabin let out the breath it had been holding for 2 hours. The jetway was quiet in the way that spaces between things are always quiet. Not peaceful, not empty, just suspended. The hum of the ventilation system doing its ordinary work. The distant sound of ground equipment moving across the tarmac outside. The particular silence that settles over a place where something significant has just happened, and the air hasn't quite processed it yet. Audra Phelps stood in the aisle of Flight 412 and did not rush. That was the first thing Damon noticed about her in this context, as opposed to the boardroom context where he had encountered her twice before. In a boardroom, she was precise and prepared, and moved through an agenda with the efficiency of someone who respects everyone's time, including her own. Here she was something different, slower, more deliberate. The way a person moves when they understand that speed is not what this moment needs. She had a tablet in her hand. She turned it so the screen faced outward. "Miss Harlow," she said. Bridget had not moved from her position near the cabin door. She was still upright, still composed in the external sense, the sense of shoulders back and chin level and expression controlled. But something underneath the composure had already begun to shift, the way ground shifts before you can see the surface change. She looked at the tablet. Audra had pulled up the audio transcript. Clean 12-point text on a white background, time-stamped, each speaker labeled. Bridget read the first line. "He's one of those, making everything a problem." She read it in the silence of the cabin with 30-something passengers watching her read it, and the specific experience of seeing your own words documented and attributed and displayed in a format designed for official uses is different from the experience of saying them. Saying them happened behind a curtain in a moment of assumed privacy. Reading them happened here, now, in the aisle of the aircraft, in front of the person they had been set about. Bridget's jaw moved, nothing came out. Audra swiped to the next screen, camera footage. The above's left angle that caught seat 1A cleanly. Damon sitting with the cardboard box at the edge of the tray table, the timestamp running in the corner. Then Bridget entered the frame, the exchange, the hot towel in one hand, the non-look, the pivot and departure before he had finished speaking. Bridget watched herself on the screen, and something happened in her face that was almost interesting to witness. Not remorse in any simple sense, something more complicated than that. The particular expression of a person who has held a story about themselves for a long time, a story in which they are professional and fair and good at their job. and is now being shown evidence that the story had gaps in it. Large ones. Ones that had been there long enough to have caused specific documented harm to a specific documented person. It didn't last long. This is a violation of crew privacy. We were not informed. Page 12 of your employment contract, Audra said. She teeds her voice. Shin never raised her voice. And page 7 of the Apex Crew Handbook, which you signed acknowledgement of receipt for in March of this year. All premium and standard are subject to audio and video monitoring for quality assurance and safety compliance. She paused. You were notified, in writing, through the standard crew communications channel, twice. Bridget closed her mouth, opened it, closed it again, and that was when the performance finally stopped. Not because Bridget chose to stop it, but because there was nothing left to perform for. The curtain she had operated behind for 16 years had been pulled back, and what was behind it was on a screen and in a transcript and in the hands of the head of human resources, and there was simply nowhere left to go with the story she had been telling. Tessa Grady was still standing at the edge of the galley curtain. She had been there since Audra walked in, and she had not moved. She was watching Bridget with an expression that they could not fully name. Not satisfaction, not relief exactly. Something closer to the feeling you get when you have been carrying a weight for a long time, and someone finally acknowledges that the weight is real. That you were right about what it was and where it came from. Tessa had been carrying it for 7 months. It was real. She had been right. Audra turned to the cockpit. I need Captain Dowd out here, please. One of the people who had come aboard with Audra, the one with the tablet, moved to the cockpit door and knocked twice. A brief exchange through the door. Then Earl Dowd came out. He had the look of a man who had spent the past several minutes in the cockpit doing the same rapid recalculation that people do when the ground beneath the long-held assumption shifts without warning. He was still physically large, still carried the posture of 3 decades in command. But the authority had gone somewhere else. What was left was a man trying to figure out what he actually knew versus what he had been told. He looked at Audra. He looked at the tablet in her hand. He looked at Damon in 1A. Audra said, Earl, not Captain, his first name. The specific choice of first name in this context was not accidental, and Dowd clearly understood it wasn't. I need you to understand what we're working with before we go any further. She turned the tablet so he could see the screen. This is the booking record for seat 1A. Pre-ordered meal, steak placed 6 weeks ago, confirmed through the standard Apex reservation system. She swiped. This is the cancellation log. 6:48 this morning. Crew access terminal at JFK. Specific credential timestamp. This did not come from the passenger's account. She swiped again. This is the audio from the galley. Multiple timestamps. Multiple speakers, including you. Dowd looked at the screen. His expression when he heard his own voice and through the tablet's small speaker was difficult to describe. It was the expression of a man hearing himself make a decision and understanding for the first time the full context of what that decision was made inside. I don't see an actual problem. Let me go talk to him. He had said that. He remembered saying it. He had believed when he said it that he was being reasonable, that he was going to walk out and have a brief professional exchange and resolve a minor service complaint and return to the cockpit, and the rest of the flight would be unremarkable. He had believed that because Bridget had told him the passenger was being difficult and making the cabin uncomfortable, and he had known Bridget for 11 years, and 11 years of shared professional history is a powerful lens through which to receive information about an unfamiliar passenger you have never met, and whose documentation you have not seen, and whose side of the story you have not heard. He understood that now. He understood it in the specific, uncomfortable way that you understand something when the evidence is directly in front of you and cannot be reframed as anything other than what is. The maintenance team has been through this aircraft, Audra said. There is no technical issue. Dowd said nothing, which means the diversion to Memphis needs a different explanation in the FAA report than the one that was filed when you made the announcement. Still nothing. Earl, I'm not here to end your career, but I need you to understand that what happened on this aircraft today is documented completely and will be reviewed at every level that has jurisdiction over it. What happens next depends significantly on how you engage with this process. She paused. Starting now. Dowd looked at Damon. It was a long look. The look of a man doing something he should have done 2 hours ago, which was actually see the person in front of him. Not the complaint, not the disruption, not the category Bridget had placed him in before he ever opened his mouth. The actual person. Sitting in 1A with a cardboard box at the edge of his tray table and a stillness that had never once in 3 hours cracked into anything that justified what had been done in response to it. I didn't know who you were, Dowd said. The cabin was completely still. Damon looked at him. He held it for a moment. Let it be what it was. A man saying the true thing finally in the wrong order. That, Damon said, is exactly the problem, Captain. He let it sit. You should have treated me right without needing to know who I was. The sentence landed in the silence of the cabin the way certain true things land. Not like an argument, not like an accusation, like a fact that has been waiting a long time to be said in the right place to the right person and has finally arrived. Dowd absorbed it. He did not look away. He stood there with it for several seconds, then something facing in his face through a sequence of things, starting somewhere near defensiveness and ending somewhere much closer to understanding. Not comfortable understanding, the kind that costs something. He turned and walked off the aircraft. He did not look back. Bridget followed with the stiff posture of someone determined to look like they are choosing to leave rather than being required to. She passed Damon's row without looking at him. She looked at a fixed point on the wall of the jetway and walked toward it and did not look back either. The cabin breathed, not loudly, but perceptibly. The specific collective exhale of a space that has been holding some and is now allowed to release it. And then, from somewhere in the business class section behind the curtain, someone started to clap. Not a big sound, not theatrical. One person, slow, deliberate, the kind of applause that is not about celebration but about witnessing. About marking that something happened here that mattered and deserved to be marked. A few more joined. Then, a few more. It was not a standing ovation. It was not a movie moment. It was just people on a Tuesday morning in Memphis acknowledging in the most human way available to them that they had seen something true happen, and they wanted the person at the center of it to know they had seen it. Damon sat with it. He did not wave, did not smile in the performed way. Did not deflect with modesty or amplify with gratitude. He just let it be what it was. Real, simple, briefly, genuinely moving. Then it faded, and the cabin returned to its ordinary sounds, and Lorraine came through the curtain from business class and sat down in the empty seat beside him. This time nobody said anything about it. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "Mama would have cried." He didn't answer right away. He sat with it the way he sat with most things, letting it find its proper weight before he responded to it. Not because of the fight, Lorraine said. She was looking at her hands resting in her lap. She always said that you were going to do something with the patience she could never teach herself to have. She taught me, Damon said. She just didn't know it. Lorraine looked up at him. I know, she said. That's what would have made her cry. They sat with that for a while. The Memphis airport went about its business outside the oval windows. On vehicles crossing the tarmac. A different aircraft pushing back from an adjacent gate. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday that didn't know or care what had just happened inside this one. Audra came back down the aisle after completing whatever she needed to complete at the door. She sat in the seat across from Damon, the one that had been empty since boarding. She set her tablet down. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has a great deal to cover and is choosing what to cover first. Preliminary documentation is complete, she said. Legal has everything. The FAA notification about the nature of the diversion has been submitted. She paused. That's going to be its own process with Dowd, separate from the HR investigation, separate from what we do internally. How does that end for him? Audra considered it. He's not going to lose his license permanently. The FAA will see the distinction between acting from prejudice and acting from misplaced trust. But there will be consequences. Suspension, mandatory review, retraining. She looked at Damon directly. He made a decision about this flight based on one person's account without asking a single question of anyone else. In any context that has consequences. In aviation, it has specific, serious ones. Damon nodded. He thought about Dowd in the galley, listening to Bridget describe a passenger who was not letting it go, and deciding without verification that the passenger was the problem. He thought about how easy that decision must have been, how natural, how unremarkable it would have felt in the moment to trust the person he had flown with for 11 years over the person he had never met and would never have to see again after this flight. He thought about how many decisions exactly like that one got made every day with every aft institution and organization and system. Not by people who were monsters, by people who trusted what was familiar and didn't think carefully enough about what that trust was built on. "The 4 proposals you filed," Damon said. Audra looked at him. "I want all of them on the table at the next board meeting. Not tabled, not deferred to a subcommittee, on the table. Some members will resist, I know. They'll call this an isolated incident, say we've addressed it. Say the cost of systemic reform isn't justified by one event. Then I'll show them the footnote," Damon said. 23 complaints, 31 submitted resolution. And I'll ask them, specifically and directly, to explain what threshold of evidence they require before they're willing to call something a pattern. Audra was quiet for a moment. "I filed those proposals because the data was there," she said. "Was always there." The disparity in resolution rates, the concentration of plaintiff around specific crew members and specific routes, the systematic dismissal of cases that should have gone to full review. She paused. "I filed them 4 times, and 4 times I was told the timing wasn't right, or the budget cycle didn't support it, or the data was interesting, but not yet conclusive." She looked at the tray table. "I kept every version, every rejection note, every meeting minute. Why? Because I thought someday someone would read them." Damon held her gaze. "Someone's reading them now," he said. "All of them, before the board meeting." Audra picked up her tablet. She nodded once, the nod of a person who has been waiting a long time for a specific door to open and is not going to make a performance out of it finally being open. "I'll have everything consolidated and ready," she said. She stood. Audra. She looked back, the rejection, Newt's notes, the tablings, the meeting minutes from when they were deferred. "Keep all of it. Not for this. For whoever comes after us and needs to make this case again somewhere else." She looked at him for a moment. "Already scanned," she said. "Backed up in 3 places." She moved back toward the front of the aircraft to continue coordinating with her team. Damon looked out the window. He thought about his father, about the kitchen table on Dunbar Street, about the calculation his father had refined over 22 years on the plant floor, about coming home from a night shift in the January cold and sitting down without complaint and saying, "The machine doesn't think about who gets ground up in it." His father had been right. He had always been right, but Franklin West had also never been in a position to make the machine stop. He had worked inside it, had made his calculations about where to spend his energy and where to conserve it, had raised 2 children on those calculations, had given them, through the specific example of his life, both the knowledge of what the machine was and the drive to build something outside it. Damon had built something outside it, and today he had brought it back in, not to grind anyone up, to introduce enough friction that the machine had to reckon with itself. Tessa Grady came to the front of the cabin at 11:20 and stood beside 1A. She had her hands clasped in front of her, not the nervous clasping from earlier in the flight, something steadier, the posture of a person who has done the thing they were afraid to do and is standing on the other side of it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Am I going to lose my job?" "No," Damon said. She absorbed that. Bridget is going to say I undermined the crew. Bridget's account of what happened today is going to matter considerably less than the audio recording of what happened today. And what you told me is part of the record. Voluntary disclosure, no prompting. That matters in an investigation. Tessa nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been telling myself for 7 months," she said, "that I just needed to get through the probationary period, that I'd speak up once I had a permanent position, once I was in a safer place." A pause. "I think I knew that wasn't really true. I think I was just scared and I needed a reason to wait that sounded like strategy." Damon looked at her. "I know that feeling. How did you know when to stop waiting?" He thought about it. Not the quick version, the actual answer. "I stopped asking when it would be safe," he said, "and started asking what it was costing me to keep waiting. Costing me, and costing the people who didn't have the option to wait at all." Tessa was quiet. "What was the answer?" she said. "Too much," he said. The answer was always too much. She stood with that for a moment, then she straightened up. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you." he said back. What you did today is of wapai something changes, not the only part, but part. She nodded, turned, walked back toward the galley. At the curtain, she paused for just a second. Then she went through. The replacement crew boarded at 11:40. Their captain came through the cabin door first. A woman named Janet Ware, 53 years old, 26 years of experience. She moved through the aircraft with the particular competence of someone who has walked into complicated situations many times and understood that the most useful thing she could do would be excellent and let the excellence speak for itself. She came to 1A, extended her hand. Mr. West, I'm Captain Ware. We're going to get you to Los Angeles. He shook her hand. I appreciated it. Is there anything you need before we depart? He thought about that. Just the flight, he said. She nodded, moved to the cockpit. The new crew worked the cabin with the quiet professionalism of people who understood their job and did it without theater. No performance, no calibrated warmth that turned on and off depending on who they were looking at. Just the straightforward, consistent work of people who treated every passenger in the cabin as someone whose presence was unremarkable and welcome. When a flight attendant stopped at 1A, she had a white china plate. Warm, a proper meal. She set it down on his tray table. We're sorry for the wait, she said. Thank you, he said. She smiled and moved on. Damon looked at the plate. Then he looked at the cardboard box, still sitting at the edge of the tray table where he had pushed it 3 hours ago. He picked it up, set it on the floor, beside his seat, out of his way without ceremony, and turned back to the meal in front of him. Before the aircraft pushed back from the Memphis gate, Audra returned to his row one more time. The passengers, she said. Compensation. I want to do it before we land in Los Angeles. Full refund of today's fare across all cabins. Additional compensation for the delay. I can have it processing before we're at altitude. Do it, he said. Some board members will question the cost. Tell them to call me. She started to turn. Audra, one more thing, she waited. When you present reform package to the board, he said, lead with the people, not the numbers. The numbers are in there and they matter. But lead with the people. The school teacher from Atlanta. The woman who wrote that she was made to feel she had done something wrong by sitting down. He paused. The board can argue with a resolution rate. They can't argue with a person. Audra looked at him for a moment. I've been leading with numbers for 4 years, she said. I know. You think it makes a difference? I think the numbers explain the problem, he said, but the people are the reason it matters, and the board needs to understand the reason before they'll commit to the solution. She nodded once. I'll restructure the opening, she said. She went back to her team. The aircraft pushed back from the gate at 11:58. Damon looked out the window as Memphis fell away beneath them. The flat geometry of the airport, the city spreading out in the late morning light. Ordinary, unconcerned. A place that had briefly held something significant and was already going back to being itself. He thought about the board meeting that was coming. He had been in enough boardrooms to know how it would go. Charles Whitmore would lead the resistance. As Charles Whitmore always led the resistance to anything that required the company to look honestly at itself. He would say, isolated incident. He would say, we've addressed it. He would say, the cost of systemic reform isn't proportionate to the evidence. And Damon would open the file that Audra had spent 4 years building. And he would read them the school teacher's complaint, and the software engineers, and the sentence that had stopped him every time he encountered it, that he had been carrying since the first time he read it 3 weeks ago in the apart while the coffee went cold on the windowsill. I was made to feel like I had done something wrong by sitting down. He was going to read that sentence in the boardroom, and he was going to let it sit to silence afterward, and he was going to wait for someone to explain to him what isolated incident it belonged to. The board meeting happened 9 days later. Damon arrived without a prepared speech. He had prepared facts. He let Charles Whitmore go first, as Whitmore always went first. We've addressed the incident, Whitmore said. The crew has been dealt with. The passenger has been compensated. The story is already fading from the news cycle. What exactly are we trying to accomplish here? Damon opened the file. He did not lead with the numbers. He read the school teacher's complaint aloud. The whole thing. Slowly. He read the software engineer's account of asking 3 times for a blanket and watching one appear immediately for the person behind him. He read 4 more. And then he read the last one. I was made to feel like I'd done something wrong by sitting down. He closed the file. The boardroom was quiet. 23 complaints, he said. 14? 31% resolution. That means 16 people used the process we told them existed, told the truth about what happened to them, and received in return either nothing or a voucher. He looked around the table. That is not an isolated incident. That is what our system ran without anyone holding it accountable. Whitmore said, "You're drawing a causal connection that the data doesn't necessarily. The audio from this flight is not a data point," Damon said. "It is a recording of a crew member with 16 years of service saying a passenger doesn't belong in first class. That is not subject to causal interpretation. That is what was said." Whitmore was quiet. Patricia Gould, who had said nothing yet, leaned forward. "I'd like to see Audra's full reform proposal as label," she said. She sounded tired in the way that people sound tired when they have been waiting a long time to say something obvious. The complete version. All 4 iterations if necessary. Whitmore looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has already decided and is not going to undecide. "I voted table the second proposal," she said to the room. "I told myself the timing wasn't right. I was wrong about that. The timing was right 2.5 years ago. We chose convenience over accountability, and 16 people paid for that choice." She looked at Damon. "Let's put it on the table." Audra presented the reform package. She led with the people. She read the same complaints Damon had read. She put names to them. She described without editorial what each person's experience had been and what the system's response had been. And then she walked through the 4 proposals, all of them, showing which one had been designed to address specific documented failures in the complaint review process, and how each failure had continued to produce the same results in the years since the proposals were tabled. She presented it without anger, without the performance of grievance, just the plain, documented, undeniable record of a system that had been telling on itself for years and hadn't been listened to. The vote was 8-2. Whitmore voted no. One other member voted no. Everyone else voted yes. Audra had a full implementation mandate before she left the building. She stopped Damon in the hallway. She didn't make a speech. She was already thinking forward, already running the sequencing in her head the way she had been running it for 2.5 years. The program that existed in proposal form and was now going to exist in the world. She looked at him. "I'll get it done," she said. "I know you will." She turned to go. "Audra," he looked back. "The 4 proposals, the rejection notes, the 6, keep them accessible." "Not archived, accessible." He paused, "because this conversation is going to need to happen again somewhere else. At another company or another airline or another industry, where someone has been filing the same proposals and getting the same non-answers. And when that happens, whoever is making the case needs to be able to point to a place where it worked." She looked at him. "Already done," she said. She walked down the corridor and didn't look back. 7 months later, Damon Slim CC 1A on Apex Flight 412, New York to Los Angeles, 7:15 in the mornings, the same gray pre-dawn light over the tarmac, the same gate, the same route he had flown 40, maybe 50 times. Different aircraft, different crew, the same Damon. He sat down the way he always sat down, opened his tablet, pulled up the current operational report for Apex Airlines, the one that had come in yesterday afternoon. He read the footnote first, the way he always read footnotes first. Formal complaints from passengers identifying as Black or African American in first and business class cabins, 7 in the past 7 months. Resolution rate, 89%. He read it's saying, 89%. 0, not he had never expected. 0 would have meant system had become something other than a system made of people, and people were complicated and imperfect and sometimes wrong in ways that policies couldn't fully reach. But 7 and 89%. That meant 6 of those 7 people had raised their hand and gotten a real response, had used the process and had the process work, had told the truth about what happened and had been taken seriously. That was different from 31%. That was profoundly, significantly different. He put the tablet down. Tessa Grady came down the aisle. She had transferred to this route 5 months ago at her own request. She had the walk of someone who had found footing, not in the performed way of someone who has decided to project confidence, but in the quiet way of someone who has done something hard and come out the other side of it, knowing more about who they are. She stopped at 1A. She had a tray. On it, a glass of water and a small, sealed card. She set the tray down and placed the card beside it. She looked at him. "Good morning, Mr. West. Your pre-order is confirmed. Steak and eggs, medium rare, out as soon as we're at altitude." She paused, a small pause. "Welcome back." "Thank you, Tessa." She moved on. He looked at the card. Cream carts, handwritten, signed by the whole crew. 5 names. Tessa's in the lower corner, her handwriting small and careful. "We know what this flight cost you 7 months ago. We know what it cost people before you who didn't have what you had to fight back with. What you did gave us something to point to, not a policy, not a number. A moment, a real one, that says this is what it looks like when we do it right. We're trying to do it right." He read it twice. He folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. He looked out the window. The plane began to push back. New York going from dark to pale at the edges. The city spreading in every direction the way it always did. Enormous and indifferent and full of people going about their Tuesday without knowing or needing to know what had happened on a flight 7 months ago, or what was different about this one. He thought about his mother. Not her hands this time. Not the lotion bottles, or the cracked knuckles, or the 12 rooms a day for 28 years. He thought about her face. He thought about the specific expression she had when she was proud of something. Not the loud version. She didn't have a loud version. She had a quiet version, a stillness that was different from her ordinary stillness. The kind of stillness that happens when a person is holding something precious and doesn't want to disturb it. He thought that Lorraine was probably right. She would have cried. He thought about his father. The machine doesn't think about who gets ground up in it. No, it doesn't. But the machine can be changed by the people who run it. If those people decide that what it's producing is not what they're willing to keep producing, if they decide that the cost of the status quo has become higher than the cost of the friction. It was slow. It was imperfect. It required someone to go first and someone else to follow and someone after that to keep the record, so the next person didn't have to start from nothing. But it was possible, he thought. That is the thing worth saying. Not the drama of the flight, not the reversal. The thing worth saying is that it's possible, that the machine can be changed. The aircraft leveled out at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign went off. Tessa came back down the aisle with a white china plate. Steak and eggs. Medium rare. Exactly as ordered. Served on real china with real cutlery, the way every passenger in the cabin was being served. Not because of who they were, or what they owned, or what they had proven about themselves on a difficult morning 7 months ago. Just because it was right. She set it down in front of him. No ceremony. "Enjoy," she said simply, and moved on. Damon looked at the plate. He looked out the window. The clouds white and flat, and the sky above them was the specific blue of early morning at altitude, clear and wide and going on in every direction without interruption. He thought about the school teacher from Atlanta, the software engineer from Houston, the woman who had written, "I was made to feel like I had done some wrong by sitting down." He thought about those people, about what their mornings on this airline had cost them, about the specific courage it had taken to file a complaint, and the specific injury of having that complaint disappear into a 31% succot. He hoped they knew. He didn't have a way to tell them directly, but he hoped, in whatever way hope works across the distance between people who have never met but have lived inside the same system, that they knew something had changed, that the machine they had raised their hands against was not exactly the same machine it had been, that their hands had mattered, even when the system had pretended they hadn't. He picked up his fork. He looked out at the sky one more time. Los Angeles was 6 hours away, and the morning was clear all the way there. He ate breakfast at 35,000 feet, like a man who had somewhere important to be. Which he did. He always had. The only thing that had changed was that the world around him was finally, slowly, imperfectly, beginning to act like it knew that. And that was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything.